Putting aside politics for principles, organising around moral values and not party lines. This is what one American pastor says is needed to solve the moral crisis in the United States. I'm Femi Oke.
And I'm Malika Bilal. His multi-faith, multiracial movement is committed to an agenda that includes equal education, access to health care, the economy, and reforming the justice and electoral systems. This is Reverend Dr. William Barber addressing the Democratic National Convention in July.
They tell me that when the heart is in danger, somebody has to call an emergency code. And somebody with a good heart will bring a defibrillator to work on a bad heart. Because it's possible to shock a bad heart and revive the pulse. In this season, when some want to harden and stop the heart of our democracy, we are being called, like our foremothers and fathers, to be the moral defibrillators of our time. We must shock this nation with the power of love. We must shock this nation with the power of mercy. We must shock this nation and fight for justice for all. We can't give up on the heart of our democracy, not now, not ever.
Reverend Dr. William Barber joins us now from Raleigh, North Carolina. He's president of the North Carolina National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, founder of the Forward Together Moral Movement, president of the Repairers of the Breach, and author of The Third Reconstruction. Rev, it's so good to have you here. I was just looking at you there at the Democratic National Convention last year. Oh, I'm thinking, what was the sermon? The sermon where you thought, I have hit it out of the park. These people are eating out of my hands. My work is done. Mic drop. What was that sermon? Was it that one?
I don't know, Femi. And I went there as a pastor, not as a representative of the NAACP, but I had been on a tour by that time to nearly 15 states. We had been holding a moral revival, time for a moral revolution. And I'd been lifting up this theme, and it had caught on all across the country that something is deeply wrong with the heart of the democracy. Think about it. When you can have candidates that say, elect me, and this is how I'm going to make things great. I'm going to take your health care. I'm going to take your voting rights. I'm going to attack you if you're gay. I'm going to attack you if you're Muslim. I'm going to take tax monies to the wealthy, cut programs for the poor. I'm going to make it easier to get a gun than it is to vote. Think about that. Something is wrong. That's not Democrat or Republican. That's a deep-seated soul heart problem in democracy. What I did hear back from the people, that the people are ready for something bigger than the puny language of left versus right and Democrat versus Republican.
I'm glad that you said that, because we took some of your words and sent them out to our online community to see what they thought about them. One of them, the one that stuck out the most for our team here at the stream, some things just aren't right versus left, they're right versus wrong. And we asked people what they thought. And we got an answer from Zeb. And Zeb says, some things one could dismiss by arguing right and wrong is based on different moral perspectives. So what do you make of that? Because what you say is right, someone else could say, well, that's an opinion.
Well, it would be if you did not have some basic fundamentals. So for instance, from a religious perspective, if you're talking about right versus wrong, I'm a Christian, but Jews, Christians, and Muslims, you could find the same tracing in the faith. There are more religious texts that talk about how we treat the poor, how we treat the least of these, how we treat the sick, how we embrace the stranger, and how we love people. But I'm talking about more in terms of thousands more than there are any texts that talk about hate and how you mistreat and you use power to influence discrimination. So first of all, from our deepest sacred text, the predominant issues are love and justice and mercy. In the Constitution, if we're going to abide by our Constitution calls for we the people, and it says that the establishment of justice, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and domestic tranquility are our moral principles. It does not say anything about creating policies of injustice. It does not say take from people welfare. It says promote the general welfare. It does not say defend some people's rights, but not other people's rights. It said provide for the common defense. So we have a moral foundation, both scripturally and constitutionally, religious values and constitutional values, upon which we can make these decisions. And by the way, our elected officials, they put their hand on a Bible or a Quran or a book of faith, and they swear to uphold the Constitution. We believe that when we see people who are willing to attack voting rights and cut health care and attack the poor, they are in fact engaging in actions that are morally indefensible and constitutionally inconsistent.
So, Reverend, how do you explain this last 11 years where you have tangled with Republican officials over what you say is not politics, it's morality? Why is there this back and forth between you and your local politicians, Republican ones?
Well, between thousands and thousands of people in this state, even Republican, 11% of the people that got arrested with us in North Carolina tomorrow Monday and March were Republican. People say, look, I'm a Lincoln Eisenhower Republican. I'm not a Tea Party extremist. In fact, I often say that the Republicans that claim to be Republicans in North Carolina, they don't look anything like their founder, Abraham Lincoln. They don't govern like Teddy Roosevelt. They
What's
surely
a North
don't.
Carolina Republican look like?
Well, a North Carolina Tea Party extremist, Governor Pat McCrory, led them for a while. He's now out of office. He was voted out in 2016. You have a Senator Berger, you have a Speaker Moore. This is what they believe. They believe that when they get in power, that they should use that power to take people's voting rights, to take access to health care and deny it, to cut public education, give money to private schools. They believe they should not raise the minimum wage and provide a living wage. Instead, they should give more money to the wealthy. We believe that's contrary, and so we took them on.
You know, Reverend, that reminds me of another one of your quotes that I like a lot. You said this at the DNC not too long ago. It's cited here in this tweet from Joe Nelson, who says, Jesus, these are your words, Jesus, a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew, called us to serve the poor. When you said that, my eyes, like, I kind of perked up because I hadn't heard someone say it that plainly. What is the truth, though? But it's that brown skin part that I'm going to dwell on a little bit, because people online are talking about race. So I'm going to throw a video comment at you. This is something we got from someone named Steven out of New Jersey, and he talks about a narrative of African Americans being immoral and how to combat that. Have a listen.
Donald Trump has unfortunately done a very effective job of convincing a lot of Americans that black people are the problem in this country, that our culture is inherently immoral, that we commit most of the violent crime, and that stop and frisk and brutal police tactics are legitimate ways to keep us in line. What can we as a community do to alter this narrative? What can we say that will reach out to people of various social and economic and racial backgrounds to turn the tide on this sort of characterization?
Yeah. You know, that brother is raising a powerful point. And let me see if I can shorten the answer. It's Trump, but it's not just Trumpism. That is as American as apple pie. You know, Trump is not the first person to occupy the White House who used racism and classism to enrage certain elements of the white electorate to vote for them. I mean, he's not the first racist U.S. president. It's not
Reverend,
just him alone.
Did you just call the President of the United States a racist?
Oh, sure, but let me define what racism means. I surely did. And not only him, when you think about systemic racism, he's not the only person in Washington, D.C., Congress people and others who are using the premise of race. Now, it takes a moment to drill down into this. You have had two major movements in this country that have fundamentally shifted America. They were called Reconstruction movement. One was from 1868 to around the early 1900s. The other one was from 1954 to about 1968. In both of those movements, they were in the South. Black and white people came together and they fundamentally changed America. One was post-slavery, one was post-World War II. They changed criminal justice laws, they changed education policy, they opened up voting rights. The country shifted. But in each era, there was a backlash. The backlash of the 1800s was called the Redemption Movement. It meant to redeem the country from the influence of black and white people working together and put it back in the hands of the white man. In the 1960s, it was called the White Southern Strategy. The goal was to make the South, from Virginia to Texas, a solid block of votes, Strom Thurmond, who was a segregationist, and Jesse Helm from North Carolina segregation, led an effort to pull Dixiecrats out of the Democratic Party, put them in the Republican Party, and to make the Republican Party in some ways the party of whites. Those are not my words, those are the words of Kevin Phillips. And it was about redeeming, taking back America, making America great again. When Trump uses these themes, he's touching wounds that are deep in the American DNA. We talk about Steve Bannon being in the White House, a white supremacist. Woodrow Wilson played Birth of a Nation in the White House, which was a white supremacist film in 1916 that was used to lift up the Klan, glorify white supremacy, and to diminish black people and white people who were working with them. Racism is not just David Dukes, even though that's racist, or the Klan. Racism is when, let me tell you a grown-up conversation about racism. You have 18 million poor whites in this country. That's 8 million more than African Americans and 5 million more than Latinos. And yet 10 of the poorest states are in the South, predominantly white electorates that continue to elect candidates that vote against the very programs that would help white people come out of poverty. Medicaid expansion, living wages, those things. What are politicians doing to fool those people? I don't blame the people. What kind of racial analysis that they would make them think that those programs just help black and brown people?
See, Reverend, I'm sure people are watching you and listening to you and thinking, this Reverend, he's really good at speaking, but what is he actually doing? I want to take our audience back to North Carolina, 2013. This is when you started to get some national recognition. This is what the Reverend does when he's out with his colleagues, with the coalition, doing some civil disobedience. Take a look at this.
We can't walk away. History will judge us if we do. Too many poor people will be hurt if we do. Too many sick will die if we do. Too many children will be hurt if we do.
Children need more protection. Children need better protection. Children need effective protection from chemicals in the air, in water, in food, and in soil, and they need it now.
And we are here because of what's inside our heart. Yeah. Inside our hearts, we love everybody. Yeah. Inside our hearts, we love teachers, and we love children, and we love the sick, and we love the unemployed. And the reason we ain't going nowhere is because there's something down on the inside.
Reverend, people are looking at this. People are looking at your reputation for activism, civil rights activism, and saying maybe this is an example for what we should do, not just in North Carolina, but elsewhere. What do you tell people when they're looking to you for inspiration?
Well, whenever we have changed the language in this country and focused on moral organizing, whenever we have built broad-based coalitions, whenever we have had a legal strategy, whenever we have brought the faith community and the non-faith community together but around constitutional values, whenever we built a movement and campaigns, not a moment, we've won. We've beat back extremism. So what you saw there, number one, look at the diversity. Look at the issue focus, the agenda focus. We were consistent for over 3 years in building Marmot. We also had a legal strategy, and in 2016, we saw the fruit of it. We won in court against the worst voter suppression law since the Shelby decision in 2013. We won against racially based gerrymandering. And now the courts have ordered a new election, but because long before the Russians hacked our system in America was hacked by voter suppression. Voter fraud is alive, voter suppression is alive and well. Number two, we won an election. The governor who led this extremism is out of office now. We won the Secretary of State's office, the Attorney General's office, the state Supreme Court, and never endorsed candidates. What we did was change the consciousness of the state. When we started, only about 40% of North Carolinians believed in Medicaid expansion. Now over 58% say, look, we should have Medicaid expansion for 500,000 North Carolinians. So we have to change the conversation. And that's why I say have grown-up conversation about systemic racism. You asked me about the president. Yes, if you promote voter fraud and point it toward the African American and say nothing about voter suppression, that's systemic racism. If you cut the Affordable Care Act and you hurt 3 million African Americans, take their health care from them, and 17 million white, that's systemic racism and classism. If you deny living wages when you know 54% of African Americans make less than a living wage, and 62 million Americans make less than a living wage. That's systemic racism and classism. That's what we have to talk about when we talk about racism and classism, and build a movement around those moral concerns.
So, Reverend, you mentioned changing the consciousness of the state and that being a victory, but there's a question here that's asking for, a real practical answer. This is Ryan, who's watching us live on Facebook and sent this in. How can I start a conversation on moral and social progress in my conservative Catholic community? What do those conversations begin to look like when you're trying to cross the aisle? Because as you mentioned, this is a broad coalition. It's diverse. There's Republicans, there's Democrats, there are independents. How does that start?
Well, actually, I went on, as I said, myself, Sister Simone, Dr. James Ford, Tracy Blackman, we did a moral revival tour. So what I would say to your listener, one thing, go to Repairs of the Breach, our website, and you can find information on how to hook up where those conversations are already going on. But secondly, in North Carolina, we didn't just go to Raleigh and to the legislature, we went to Mitchell County. Now, Mitchell County is 99% white, 89% Republican. Has one of the highest levels of paramilitary groups in the South. We now organizing there, because when we went there and said, we're not here as Republican, we're not here as Democrat, we're here because your community is hurting because of politics. They said, what do you mean? We said, well, Medicaid expansion. They said, no, Medicaid expansion is primarily going for people who are not working and are lazy. We said, oh, is that true? Did you know that 1,000 people in Mitchell County need Medicaid, and they're not lazy? They're not Black, they're not brown. They said, we didn't know that. And we said, and that's the point. You have candidates that come from this county, they tell you they're against the LGBT community, they're for prayer in the school, and they're against abortion, and therefore you should vote for them because they're the moral candidate. But what they don't tell you is that when they get to Raleigh, they're gonna cut public education, which is gonna hurt this community. They're gonna deny you health care, they're gonna cut wages, and it's gonna hurt the very people in this community. You would be surprised that when we have that conversation rooted in a moral framework, it changes the dynamic and our ability to organize.
I want to give you something that we got from someone who references something that happened this week, an incident in Congress. But what I liked about his comment is that he pivots a little bit, and he wants to talk about systemic bigotry. So have a listen to what Cameron Parker told us, and you should know he is a North Carolina resident as well. Have a look.
The hiding of Coretta Scott King's letter regarding Senator Sessions for 30 years, followed by 49 senators voting to instantly silence Senator Warren once she shared the letter, speaks volumes to what is happening in our government today. Now, my question is specifically, what should we be doing on a local, state, and national level to fight these 49 senators, as well as those who follow in their systemic bigotry in this country?
Yeah, great question. All movements must begin at the local level, because what we're saying is that we have to march in D.C. We have to organize in D.C., but we also have to organize back in these states. And we have to expose how these senators are. See, the same people that voted for her not to read Coretta Scott's letter are the same senators that vote against living wage, the same senators that want to repeal health care, the same senators that vote against the LGBT community, the same senators who have refused to support restoration of the Voting Rights Act, the same people who vote against protections of our climate and the environment. So again, if they are cynical enough to be together, we must be strong enough and smart enough, courageous enough to stand together. So we have to have movements in DC, but we also have to have state level movements. And then lastly, that writer, we have to think about what was in that letter that scared them. It was exposing systemic racism, because see, remember how they tried to position Sessions? He's nice. He visited some black people when they had children. That has nothing to do with systemic racism. Slave masters visited the slave huts. Strom Thurmond had a black girlfriend. Jesse Helms hired black people. But the policies that they passed were racist, were class-based, were hurtful to the least of these. They don't want that legacy exposed. What we have to do now is expose it and organize from the states up and do what my daughter calls it interlocking justice and injustice. Connect the dots and show how these are extreme agendas. Now, and it's not going to happen in just a moment.
Sure.
We're talking about building a long-term movement.
Reverend, we have one question I want to pose to you. This is from Belissa Thompson, and I'm posing this one because she sums up what a lot of activists online are feeling. Have a listen to what she told us.
As a Black disabled woman, part of my advocacy is intersectionality and talking about the experiences of those who are left out of the conversation and left out from participating in the table. What words of advice do you give to those like myself who are doing this work, who are doing what is morally right, speaking up on that and trying to protect themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to, as you said, intentionally be intersectional. All voices have to be welcome. That's one of the things I'm most encouraged by being the servant leader of the Moral Monday movement. We understand we do not fight alone. Victories have never been won fighting alone. You must build a movement around an agenda. That's why we have 5 basic principles: economic sustainability, addressing poverty, educational equality for all, healthcare for all, and environmental justice, criminal justice reform, and protecting and expanding voting rights and equal protection under the law. And we say, if you agree with those, come on into family. You don't have to give up your silo, but come into family so that you have also a covering, you have a body. We have to do our silo work, but our silo work individually will not live, because the people that we're fighting against, they're not fighting in silos. I can tell you they are connected. And then we have to have an honest understanding. We are not in a sprint. We're in a marathon. This business of extremism trying to take this country back is as American as apple pie. It's going to happen now. It will happen again. We are just chosen in this season to be the ones that stand up against it. Things may get worse before they get better. They did it Moral Monday. They voted us down before we beat them at the ballot box and in the courts. We may lose some battles. Some of us are going to have to spend some time in jail, and I'm not just talking about, a minute. We're going to have to, I believe in this system, this season at some point, have a period of strong, targeted, nonviolent civil disobedience. But I want you to remember what they said in South Africa. They used to say when the people who were holding up apartheid started fighting the hardest against the anti-apartheid movement, they used to say, only a dying mule kicks the hardest.
If we could create a virtual pulpit for you, and you have an international congregation today, multi-faith, multicultural, some have no faith, people from around the world, and you did it as if you were in church on Sunday, in a minute, what would you do? What would you say to them?
So this is what I would say. Jews and Muslims and Christians honor this scripture. It's in Daniel. And in Daniel, there's this text scripture about this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. His name literally means one who will do anything to hold on to power. And this guy was a narcissist. He loved to build towers. He loved to overlay his towers with gold. He had a press corps that would go out and tell people what to do. He always was giving false information. This is actually in the Bible, Daniel 3. And he would send people out, and he told folk, I'm going to have an inauguration, in essence, and I want everybody to come and bow down to my tower. I want them to bow down to me. I'm going to be the authoritarian. They're going to have to honor me. I am the one that's going to save them. There were 3 boys, 3 millennials, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they refused to bow down. They said, we can't bow to lies. We can't bow to injustice. We can't bow to oppression. They were well off. They were pretty educated, but they refused to go along. They wouldn't bow down for a job. They wouldn't bow down for a position. And so what I'm saying to people in this scene, bowing down is not an option. If Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman didn't bow down, bowing down is not an option. If Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Mother Jones didn't bow down, bowing down is not an option. If Martin Luther King and James Reeb and Viola Davis and whites and blacks and Latinos and Cesar Chavez did not bow down to the injustices of their day, then we cannot bow down. And that movements never happen because all of a sudden, there's just massive numbers. Movements happens when people begin in their spaces to refuse to bow down and hook up together. We cannot bow to a narcissist. We cannot bow to egomaniacism. We cannot bow down to lies and injustice. Too many people have stood up before It's simply our time. This is not the worst thing we've ever faced. We've faced slavery, we've faced Holocaust, we've faced women oppression, we've faced Jim Crow, and people stood up then. We have to stand up now, because bowing down is not an option.
So now we're at the end of our program with Reverend Dr. William Barber. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you so much. Love to both of you.